Hey, before we start, turn off the lights for a second. Yeah, that's better. Now, if you hear something behind you while listening to this story, don't turn around. The Cloaked Woman on Halloween. This happened 2 years ago on Halloween of 2023. I'm a 25-year-old male, but at the time of this story I was 22. I had a long day of work due to a festival we had where we had parents bring their kids to the center for various activities such as many different competitive games, a costume contest, trivia for candy, and a kids versus parents dodgeball game. Overall, it was a very fun time, but it was definitely tiring. For context, I'm a community worker, so doing community events is pretty much what I do on a normal basis, but it's also draining if that makes sense. Anyway, after it was all done, I went home and was ready to call it a night. About an hour after I got home, it was around 6-something, my little sister called me. My sister, who I'll call Savannah, wanted me to take her and my nephew, who I'll call Jackson, trick-or-treating because neither our parents nor Jackson's parents felt like doing it. And as it usually goes, it fell on me to be the cool big brother to step in and make it happen. Savannah was 15 and Jackson was 11. Even though I wasn't feeling it at all, I got up, threw some clothes on, and headed to my parents' house to pick them up. Once I got there, I asked if they were ready, but Savannah was still finalizing her costume. She was dressed up as Raven from Teen Titans. She even had the white makeup on to give that ghostly appearance Raven usually has. Jackson was dressed as Sub-Zero from Mortal Kombat. Once Savannah was done, we got in the car and were on our way. I took them to a pretty busy neighborhood to make sure they got as much candy as possible. Upon arrival, we started going from house to house. Everyone we ran into was friendly and had plenty of treats to hand out. There was even one house where an older man gave them each a hot dog and a soda. He said every year for Halloween he doesn't hand out candy. He grills food instead because he'd rather give kids something with protein since it's good for the body. Honestly, we probably need more people like that. We passed a lot of other kids, and some gave compliments to Savannah and Jackson's costumes. I also saw some really cool costumes myself. Everyone in the area seemed to go all out. When we hit the last house for the night, we started walking back to the car. It was about a 10-minute walk since we had gone pretty far down the neighborhood. The neighborhood was less active now, and there weren't as many people out and about. That's why I got alarmed when I looked across the street and saw a person dressed in all black, standing in a yard where there were no porch lights on. I'm surprised I even noticed them at all, but I tend to always pay attention to my surroundings. When I looked closer, it seemed like the person was wearing a hooded cloak with an all-black outfit and a mask because I couldn't see their face at all. I honestly couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. Whoever it was, they appeared to be looking at us. I told Savannah and Jackson to stay close to me and said, "There's a suspicious person across the yard. Look, but don't stare." I said that so they could see who I was talking about without encouraging the person to approach or follow us. Jackson laughed and thought it was just someone trying to scare people walking by. Savannah, though, looked noticeably worried. Now, just to add some context, I was carrying a backpack with a Glock inside, and Savannah knew this. So when I told them to stay close, she probably realized I was being serious. Jackson was clueless. He's too young for me to tell him that I carry a real gun. As we were walking away, it looked like that person was still watching us, even though it was hard to tell in the dark. We were getting closer to the car when I suddenly heard heavy footsteps behind us, like boots hitting the concrete. I turned around and saw that same person again, same outfit, all black, but this time I could see more clearly. They were wearing a tactical vest, tactical boots, and black pants tucked into the boots. They had on a full spandex mask that completely covered their face. That made the situation way more serious. When you see someone dressed like that, the first thing that comes to mind is that they're armed. He's following us, I thought. I whispered to Savannah and Jackson, "I need you both to listen very carefully. Do not stop walking and do not look back. The person I mentioned earlier is following us. They're behind us right now. The last thing we want is to alarm them or set them off, so just keep your composure and keep walking." I mainly looked at Jackson when saying this because he's younger and might not fully understand how serious this was. Savannah understood completely. We kept walking and did occasional glances behind us. The person stayed the same distance away but was still following. When we got to the car, they were still coming our way. That's when I decided to make a bold move. I pulled out my Glock and pointed it at the person. I asked why the fuck they're following us. The person raised their hands, as if they didn't expect me to do that, then slowly removed their mask. It was a woman, and she looked to be in her 30s. She took her mask off but didn't answer my question. She just stared at me blankly. I asked again, still pointing the gun, "Why are you following us?" What she said next made no sense. In an almost robotic tone, she said, "I'm an undercover cop. I was told there was a break-in, so I came to check it out. That's why I was standing outside that house. But when you looked at me funny, I assumed you were the one who did it. So it would be wise to lower that weapon, or I could have you arrested for threatening an officer of the law." I hesitated, but then lowered my gun. What else was I supposed to do? I didn't want to risk an arrest or ruin the kid's night, but her story didn't make any sense. She claimed she got word of a break-in, so why would she just stand outside facing away from the house? How did me looking at her funny make her think I was the one who did it? Why would I break into a house and then casually walk through the neighborhood? Why was she wearing a hooded cloak? All these questions were racing through my mind, so I asked her, "If you're undercover, why are you in tactical gear? Wouldn't that kind of give away that you're law enforcement? And what's the point of the cloak?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me again. But this time her expression changed. There was something malicious in her eyes, like she was irritated that I didn't believe her and was deciding what to do next. Jackson and Savannah stayed completely quiet through all of this. Then she smiled this creepy, unsettling smile and said, "If you didn't have that gun, this night would have ended a hell of a lot different for you." Right as she finished saying that, I noticed 4 figures suddenly emerge from between the houses walking toward us. All of them were wearing tactical gear, but without the cloak. I instantly told Savannah and Jackson to get in the car, keeping my eyes on the woman and the figures. Once I saw they were in, I got in too and drove off. As I was leaving, the woman was still standing there, smiling. The others, 3 men and 1 woman, were not smiling. They had blank, emotionless faces, like they didn't even have souls. It's hard to explain. The whole car ride back was silent. I'm sure the kids were in shock just like I was. I dropped them off, made sure they got in safely, then went home to process everything that happened. The thing I couldn't shake off was why they targeted us. The neighborhood was full of people walking around, so why us? I wish I could say it ended there, but it didn't. A few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. It was just a photo, no words. The picture was of my car taken in the parking lot of my apartment complex. I contacted the police and told them everything that happened on Halloween night. They took the report, but they couldn't investigate unless a direct threat was made. Typical. Out of curiosity and maybe stupidity, I went back to that same house where I first saw that woman. I knocked on the door, and a man in his 40s answered. I asked if they'd experienced a break-in on Halloween night. He looked confused and said no. He said he went to bed early because he had work the next morning and didn't notice anything strange. I told him what I saw, and he had no idea what I was talking about. I thanked him for his time and left. At that point, I already knew the undercover cop story was fake, but I wanted to do my own little investigation just to make sense of it. Whoever that woman and those people were somehow knew my phone number and where I lived. It makes me wonder, was that not a random encounter after all? Were they watching me for a while? Were they planning something that night and my being armed threw them off? All those thoughts messed me up and made me feel paranoid for a long time. I had to go to therapy and install a Ring camera at my front door just to feel safe again. In case you're wondering, I haven't been contacted by any unknown numbers since. Nothing else has happened since that picture. 2 years later, I still think back on that night. Writing this out helps me a lot, and I'm trying to fully move on from it. But if there's one thing I want people to take away from this, it's to always watch your surroundings. You never know who might be watching you. It's easy to get caught up in something dangerous just for existing, so always stay safe and protected. Because I can say with full confidence that being armed that night probably saved our lives. The Man at the Edge of the Woods. This happened when I was 12 years old. It was Halloween day and my family was staying at a small family resort, about an hour away from where we lived. My parents wanted to do something different that year instead of just walking around our neighborhood for trick-or-treating. The resort was holding a Halloween celebration that weekend with a bunch of activities, games, and even a haunted hay ride. It wasn't a big place. It had maybe 10 cabins, a main lodge, a small lake, and a long open field where they set up hay rides and games. It was surrounded by woods on all sides. During the day, it looked normal, even kind of peaceful. But once it got dark, the woods looked black and creepy, and the resort felt a little too quiet. We checked in early that afternoon. I remember walking into the cabin and feeling excited because I could smell campfire smoke and candy apples in the air. Kids were running around in costumes even though it wasn't dark yet. My parents said the hayride was starting around 7 and there'd be games before that, so I went off to play while they unpacked. They had booths where you could toss rings over bottles for candy, a costume contest, and even a pumpkin carving area. Everything was decorated with orange lights and fake spider webs. I met another kid around my age there. His name was Ryan. He was wearing a skeleton costume and said he and his parents were staying in the next cabin over from ours. We played a few games together and got a good amount of candy as it got closer to 7. We saw a crowd of families walking over to the hayride area. The tractor pulling the wagon was parked near a big barn, and they had hay bales lined up inside for people to sit on. There were maybe 20 of us who got on. The driver wore a scarecrow mask, and there were workers dressed like zombies who would jump out during the ride to scare people. The ride started out fun. It was dark by then, and they had torches lighting the dirt trail. The tractor moved slowly through the woods, and every now and then, someone in a costume would appear from behind a tree or run up to the wagon. Most people laughed or screamed and then laughed again. It felt like a normal Halloween attraction, but about halfway through, something made me uncomfortable. We were passing through a part of the trail that was darker than the rest. The tractor slowed down and I looked toward the edge of the woods on my side. That's when I saw a man standing just outside the torchlight. He wasn't part of the hayride cast. I could tell that right away. He wasn't wearing a costume that fit the theme. From what I remember, he had a black jacket, jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He was just standing there, not moving, with his hands in his pockets. At first, I thought maybe he was one of the workers taking a break, but he wasn't doing anything. He was only watching. At one point, I made eye contact with him, or at least I think I did, even though his face was shadowed. I could feel his eyes locked on me. I turned to look at the people around me to see if anyone else noticed, but no one seemed to. When I looked back, he was still there, in the exact same position. I tried to ignore it for the rest of the ride, but I kept thinking about him. When the hayride ended and everyone got off, I looked back one more time toward the woods. He was gone. I didn't mention it to anyone right then. I figured maybe I imagined it or overreacted. We went back to the lodge where they had more games and food. My parents sat by a bonfire while Ryan and I went around collecting candy. Everything seemed normal again. About an hour later, I saw him again. Ryan and I were standing near the snack table when I noticed someone off to the side of the crowd. It was the same man. He wasn't close, maybe 30 feet away, but he was standing near the tree line, watching again. There were a lot of people around, so it felt strange that he'd just be standing there alone. I remember my stomach tightening when I realized he was looking in my direction. I tried to get a better look at his face, but it was hard because of the lighting. I could make out a short beard, and I think his hat had some kind of logo on it. I nudged Ryan and told him about the guy. Ryan looked over and said, "Maybe he's one of the workers." I said he's not. He was in the woods during the hayride. Ryan shrugged and said, "Maybe he's a dad." I wanted to believe that, but he wasn't talking to anyone, just standing there. A few minutes later, when I looked back again, he was gone. Around 9 o'clock, if I had to guess, most of the little kids had gone back to their cabins. The event was winding down, but Ryan and I still had energy. We decided to walk around the resort before going in. There was a trail behind the cabins that led into the woods. Ryan said we should go a little way in to do something scary for Halloween before the night ended. I didn't want to go too far, but we had flashlights and I didn't want to look like a coward. So we walked down the dirt path together, laughing and daring each other to keep going. The farther we went, the quieter it got. The sounds from the resort faded until it was just the crunching of our shoes on the path. We only went maybe 200 feet in when we stopped near a clearing. There was an old wooden sign nailed to a tree that said, "Private Property." We started throwing small rocks at the sign and pretending to summon ghosts or something dumb like that. Then we both heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, slow footsteps coming from behind us, somewhere deeper on the path. We froze and turned around. Ryan whispered, "Probably another kid." But it didn't sound like a kid. Whoever it was walked with weight, like an adult. I shined my flashlight down the path. The light only went so far, and I couldn't see anyone yet. Then the footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, it was completely silent. Then a voice spoke. It said, "Hey there, boys." It was a man's voice. Calm, but somehow intimidating. Ryan looked at me, and I think he realized the same thing I did. It was the man from the hayride. He stepped into the light just enough for us to see part of him. Same black jacket and hat. "What are you two doing out here?" he asked. "You like candy?" Neither of us said anything. He pulled something out of his pocket and held it up. I could see the orange wrapper. It was a Reese's cup. "I got a bunch more of these in my cabin," he said. "Come on, I'll give you some." Ryan took a step back. I remember his face going pale. The man took a few steps closer and then said, "You don't have to be scared. It's Halloween, I'm just giving candy out. I saw you boys on the hayride earlier." When he said that, my stomach basically dropped. I grabbed Ryan's arm and whispered, "Run!" We both turned and sprinted down the path toward the resort. I could hear him behind us for a second. His footsteps were pounding hard as he started to chase. I didn't dare look back. My heart was beating so hard it hurt. The path seemed longer than before. When we reached the edge of the woods, I could finally see the lights from the resort again. I yelled for help as we ran out of the trees and back toward the crowd near the bonfire. A few adults turned toward us, startled. We didn't stop until we got right up to the people. I turned around, expecting to see the man behind us, but he wasn't there. The path was empty. My parents came over right away asking what happened. I told them everything, about the man watching me on the hayride, seeing him near the trees, and then following us into the woods. Ryan confirmed it all. My dad and another man grabbed flashlights and went to check the path, but they didn't find anyone. A few workers searched too, but he was gone. The resort staff called the local police to report what happened. They arrived about 30 minutes later and took statements from me, Ryan, and our parents. They said they checked the area and notified nearby cabins to keep an eye out. That night, my parents didn't let me out of their sight. We stayed in the cabin with the door locked. I couldn't fall asleep for hours. Every noise outside made me jump. The next morning, the police came back and told us they searched the property but didn't find anyone matching the description. No vehicles had been reported missing, and no one fitting that man's description had checked in. They thought maybe it was a trespasser from outside the resort. We left later that day. I remember staring out the car window as we drove past the woods, half expecting to see him standing there again. For weeks after that, I kept thinking I saw him, on the side of the road, outside stores, even once at my school parking lot. But it was always someone else. Or at least I hope it was. Ryan and I kept in touch for a while. He told me he couldn't sleep for days after it happened. Nothing ever came of this. The police never called again. The man was never identified or caught. Now I'm older, and when I think about that night, what scares me isn't what he did. It's what he could have done. If we had believed him for even a second, if we had walked toward him instead of running, I don't think I'd be here to tell this story. And every Halloween since then, whenever I see someone standing alone at the edge of a crowd, I always think of that man. Sometimes people who look like they're part of the fun are watching for a different reason. The Man with the Crowbar. My name is Roger, and this happened to me on Halloween night 3 years ago. I'm 29 and work a boring office job, but it's good pay. When this happened, I was getting stuck with the shit stuff. Beginner's time off, the shifts nobody wanted, etc. So when Halloween, my favorite holiday, rolled around, I was actually quite excited. It was never easy being the new guy at work, so I was wanting to enjoy a night of seeing kids be kids and chilling out at home watching movies. At the time, I was living alone in a small house on the outskirts of town with my girlfriend, but she was out of town with her parents. It wasn't isolated exactly. I had neighbors, but the street got really quiet once the trick-or-treating hours ended. The families in the area usually shut their lights off around 9 p.m. Since I didn't have kids, I just handed out candy until the crowd died down. On several past Halloweens before I got my own place, I was quite used to the occasional ding-dong ditch prank. That's why there is a trick-and-treat here and there. That year, Halloween fell on a Saturday, and I remember it was chilly but clear out. By 10:30, I was lounging on my couch half watching a horror movie while picking through a bowl of leftover candy. I hadn't seen anyone in about an hour, so when I heard a faint knock at my side door, I assumed it was stragglers, but when I opened the door, no one was there. Just the empty driveway and the faint rustling of leaves. I brushed it off. Kids play pranks all the time on Halloween. I headed back to my living room to finish watching The Conjuring 2. 15 minutes later, I heard the same sound again, only this time it was coming from the back door, the one that led to the small deck. That set off alarms in my head because nobody used that entrance. I froze in the living room, listening. The TV was off now, and I could hear it clearly. The metal rattle of the back door knob being tested, slowly and cautiously. Whoever was trying my door was either checking if it was locked cautiously or believed it was unlocked and trying to be quiet. I crept into the kitchen, staying low, and that's when I saw him through the window. A man was crouched down near the door, wearing dark clothes and a cheap, cracked Halloween mask pushed up on top of his head. In his hand, he held a crowbar. He wasn't trying to hide. He was deliberate and calm, like he knew I was inside and didn't care. I backed away quietly and grabbed my phone, whispering to 911 what was happening. The operator told me to stay on the line, lock myself somewhere safe, and not to engage. I didn't want to make noise by slamming the doors upstairs, so I stayed crouched at the top of the steps, clutching a kitchen knife, whispering updates. I peeked down and saw the man move away from the back door. That's when I heard the faint pop of a window screen being pried off. He was at the basement window now. I whispered to the dispatcher, "He's at the basement." My voice was shaking. She told me officers were already on their way. Then came the worst moment. I heard glass crack. He was breaking the window. My blood ran cold, and it wasn't just a smash and grab. He knew I was there, and most burglars typically don't try to enter a home where they know someone's still inside. Minutes felt like hours. The dispatcher kept me talking quietly to make sure I was still okay. I heard footsteps crunching outside. The man was circling the house again. Then, headlights swept across the blinds. Relief flooded me as flashing red and blue lights pulled up in front. The man bolted. I watched him sprint across my yard, but he didn't get far. The officers tackled him just past my driveway. I didn't even realize I was shaking until I saw one of the cops leading him back in cuffs. That's when I saw what he'd been carrying: the crowbar, duct tape, and zip ties stuffed in his bag. This wasn't a burglar looking for valuables. This guy had a plan, and it was something far worse. The police told me he had a long record of breaking into homes, and that he was suspected in some other cases where people had gone missing. To this day, I hate being home alone on Halloween. It's supposed to be about scares and fun, but whenever I hear footsteps or knocking outside at night, I can't help but remember everything about this night. The part that chills me the most is if the police had been just 5 minutes later, I might not be here to tell the story. The police later followed up weeks later. The Man on the Roof. My name is Patrick McCabe. I've always had really messed up teeth growing up, like atrociously bad. Because of that and a few other things, I got my wisdom teeth out really late in life. Most people get them removed sometime in high school or, at the latest, early in college. But I was different. I didn't even sit down for a consultation until after graduating college. The process was incredibly painful, one of the most irritating things I've ever gone through. I'm not going to bore you with all the details about my recovery, but there's something you need to know. For whatever reason, the pain was so bad that I couldn't sleep through the night without taking pain medication. I developed this system where I'd wake myself up every 3 hours to take another pill, cycling between the 2 medications I'd been prescribed. It was awful, but it was the only way to prevent those massive toothaches that would literally have me in tears. My sleep schedule was completely destroyed during that period. My body got used to 3-hour cycles of sleep followed by short periods of wakefulness, and it was hard to get back to normal even after my recovery. Honestly, the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the sleep. It wasn't normal. I didn't even feel human after a while. It was like I'd become something else, constantly waking up and falling back asleep. I don't even like thinking about it. One night, pretty sure it was during the first week of recovery, I was up around 4 a.m. to take my meds again. For some reason, I couldn't fall back asleep afterwards. I don't know if it was because of my condition or because the AC had stopped working, but it was really hot in my room, way hotter than usual. I remember tossing and turning for about 10 minutes before deciding I had to do something about it. The only thing I could think of was to open my bedroom window, so I did. It helped a little, but I still couldn't sleep. So there I was, lying miserably in bed, praying I'd just drift off. But of course, I didn't. After a while, I started hearing this strange noise coming from outside my window. I never slept with it open, so at first I figured it was just some normal outdoor sound I wasn't used to. But the more I listened, the more it didn't sound normal. It was like scratching, like some kind of animal dragging its claws on something. That's the best way I can describe it. Then the noise got louder, and I realized it was coming from above me, from the roof. A few seconds later, it started moving across the roof, gradually fading out of earshot. I was pretty sure at that point that it was some kind of critter messing around on the roof. My family lives in a wooded area, so we've had our fair share of curious raccoons and pest infestations. I really wanted to just ignore it and go back to sleep, but I knew my dad would be furious if something burrowed into the attic again, so I had to do something. Plus, it wasn't like I was on the brink of falling asleep anyway. I was wide awake. So, without much thought, I threw the covers off, jumped out of bed, and headed for the garage. From there, I grabbed one of my dad's heavy-duty flashlights and walked back through the house to the back door. My room sits on the first floor near the back of the house where the roof is lowest, so I figured I'd check there first. I made it to the spot outside my bedroom window and swept the flashlight beam across the roof. I didn't see anything, so I sighed, figuring the animal had crawled to a different part of the roof while I was getting outside. I started walking around the house, trying to illuminate as much of the roof as possible. All I really needed to do was scare the animal away, which would be easy if I could just find the damn thing. I was scanning near the front of the house, where the roof is almost twice as high, when I spotted something shift in the corner of my light. With one quick flick of my wrist, I swung the flashlight toward the spot where I'd seen movement and nearly passed out. There, standing on the roof, was a person. Not an animal, not a shadow, but a fully grown human being. A naked human being, frozen in the beam of my flashlight. I screamed. I couldn't help it, and as soon as I did, the person started moving, almost like they were allergic to the light. I tried to trace them with the beam, but they were absurdly fast. Until that moment, I didn't know it was even possible to move that fast barefoot, let alone on loose shingles. They started heading back toward where my room was, and I sprinted around the house to intercept them. I don't even know what I was thinking. I should have just run back inside, but some deep instinct kept me from backing down. I yelled for my dad as I ran, hoping he'd get outside in time to help me confront or restrain the psycho on our roof. I made it to the back of the house just in time to see the person preparing to jump. My first thought was that there was no way, absolutely no way, a person could jump off that roof without getting seriously hurt, even from that lower point. Surely they'd have to find another way down. But without hesitation, the person jumped, slamming into the concrete with a deafening thump. The shock of what I was seeing froze me completely. I couldn't even process it. The fact that someone had actually jumped off our roof was so insane that my brain just shut down. I don't know how he didn't shatter every bone in his legs. My dazed shock lasted only a split second, but that was enough. The person immediately got up from the paver stones and charged at me, tackling me to the ground. He started clawing at my eyes like he was trying to rip my face off. I screamed and kicked, but I couldn't get him off me. He was grunting and spitting, and there was no logical explanation for how someone like that could be so strong. I felt blood pouring down my face, and in that moment, I truly thought I was going to die. But then, over the sound of my own screaming, I heard the back door burst open. Seconds later, my dad was there, pulling the man off me, yelling and cursing like it was life or death. I scrambled to my feet just in time to see that psycho break free of my dad's grip, completely covered in my blood. Instead of attacking again, he ran to the edge of our yard, scaled the fence, and vanished into the darkness. My dad and I stood there in stunned silence as the sound of his footsteps crashed through the forest and faded away. I'll fast forward through the rest. I went to the hospital that night. My dad almost crashed the car trying to get me there. I had lost a ton of blood, and the doctors had to give me all sorts of shots to prevent infection or disease from whatever that man had. It was a nightmare. The only silver lining was that my mouth was basically untouched, so my teeth didn't need to be re-examined. The police were useless. Not that they could have done much anyway. They said searching the woods would be unfeasible given how vast it was, and they insisted that simple security cameras would have prevented the whole thing. Later, my dad discovered that the person on the roof had actually been trying to dig into our attic, just like an animal would. Ironically, it wasn't my dad or me who was most affected. It was my mom. She cried about it over and over, and she was the one who finally upgraded our home security. I still have no explanation for what happened that night. Who that guy was, where he came from, and how he even found our house are just a few of the 1,000 questions about that night that I fear will never be answered. The face at the window. My house has a very unique design. Well, I call it unique, but most people would probably call it weird. And actually, they have. The vast majority of friends I've hosted have said so. Even a few girls I've snuck in while my parents were away. As much as I'd love to make things easier for myself and just attach photos, I doubt my parents would appreciate that. So instead, I'll describe the important details. For this story, there's really only one you need to know. You know how most houses have a porch or a small walkway leading up to the front door, and maybe a little canopy above it. Well, my house basically has a covered hallway that you have to walk through before entering the actual interior. Imagine your own front door with parts of the house on either side, then push that door back into the house, so to speak. It's like walking between two parts of the house without actually being inside. This is all to say that my bedroom is on the first floor, right next to that external hallway leading to the front door. If I stand up and look out the window next to my bed, I can see anyone standing at the door, though their back would be to me. Hopefully that makes sense. I developed a habit at a young age of peeking out that window whenever someone rang the doorbell. It was like having a hidden camera that let me check who was there before stepping into full view. What I'm about to tell you happened just a few months ago, at the very start of summer. My parents were out of town for the week, so I decided to take advantage of it and let my girlfriend, Anna, sleep over for a few days. Normally, my strict and traditional parents would never allow that. but what they didn't know wouldn't hurt them. Plus, they'd met Anna plenty of times, so it's not like she was some stranger. The first night was uneventful. Just a chill movie night with snacks and a few glasses of wine. We went to bed at a reasonable hour and went for a swim the next morning. Neither of us are party people, so we were perfectly happy just relaxing, playing games, and watching TV. The second night was when everything went wrong. It was around midnight. We were lying in the dark, pillow talking, about to fall asleep, when I heard something outside. It sounded like screeching or something being dragged. I shushed Anna and listened closely, trying to make sense of it. It seemed to be coming from the driveway, which is off to the side of the house. That alarmed me, mostly because it meant the sound was coming from really close. I listened a bit longer and realized it was the sound of one of my dad's trash cans being moved around. He sometimes keeps them in front of the garage, and I was pretty sure I'd seen a couple of them out there earlier that day. My first thought was that he hadn't fully emptied them and some animal was poking around, looking for scraps or food. Still, animal or not, hearing things moving around in your driveway is creepy, especially when you're the only one home and it's too dark to see anything. I told Anna to stay put, saying I was just going to shoo away the raccoon or whatever was rummaging through the trash. Then I calmly walked out of my room and over to the front door. I flicked on the switch for the exterior lights, but they didn't reach far enough to illuminate the driveway, just the front yard and porch. So, reluctantly, I opened the door and stepped outside, hoping my presence would be enough to scare off whatever was out there. I stood on the porch for a few seconds, waiting to hear scampering or see something dart across the yard, but nothing happened. Even the sound of the trash cans had stopped. I figured there was a slim chance whatever had been there had already run off, but it seemed unlikely since I'd been listening the whole time. Still, I turned on my phone flashlight and started walking down the front steps toward the driveway. As I got closer, I saw that one of the trash cans had definitely been disturbed. Two were sitting neatly against the garage door, but one was completely overturned, its contents scattered across the driveway. I groaned, realizing I'd have to clean up the mess. I didn't see anything nearby, even after approaching, so I assumed the animal had slipped away quietly. Just to be sure, I shined my flashlight all around the cans, but there was nothing. That pretty much confirmed it. Without thinking much more about it, I started picking up the scattered trash and tossing it back in the bin. When I was done, I went back inside, opened the garage door, pulled the trash cans in and locked it. I didn't want to risk something coming back later and waking me up again. Then I went back to bed. Anna was still awake, but barely. I could tell she was about to fall asleep. I kissed her gently on the forehead and tried to get comfortable without disturbing her too much. I was right on the edge of sleep, half dreaming but still aware enough to pull myself out of it if I tried. And that's when I heard it. A soft tapping noise, like metal on glass. At first, I thought it was part of the half-dream I was having, but something about it felt too real, too deliberate. So instead of letting myself drift off, I opened my eyes and looked around the room. Sure enough, the tapping didn't stop. I froze. It wasn't in my head. The sound was real, coming from somewhere in the room. I didn't move a muscle, just listened, trying to figure out exactly where it was coming from or what it could be. After a few seconds, I realized it wasn't coming from inside the room at all, even though it sounded so clear. That could only mean one thing. It was coming from just outside my window. I forced myself out of bed, stood up slowly, and peeked behind the curtain. In the faint light from outside, I could make out the outline of a person standing at the front door, their back facing me. My stomach dropped. I watched for a few seconds and realized they were lightly tapping on the glass over and over again, like they were expecting someone to answer. But that was insane. It was past midnight and none of the lights were on. I tried to make out more details, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. Then, as I stood there watching, I noticed them start to turn around. Without thinking, I ducked under the window just in time, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might give me away. I stayed crouched there for what felt like a full minute, terrified they had seen me. I didn't want to look again, but I had to. Taking a deep breath, I slowly stood up, pulled the curtain back, and instantly regretted it. Just 2 inches from the glass was a face staring directly at me. I screamed and stumbled backward, yanking the curtain shut. Even though we were face to face for only a split second, I could clearly see it was a man with shriveled, sagging skin, like his face was melting. I fell back onto the bed, still yelling, and Anna woke up in a panic. I shouted that there was someone outside, then locked the bedroom door and grabbed my phone to call the police. The cops arrived a little over 10 minutes later. Anna and I stayed locked in the room the whole time. I wanted to check the front door to see where he'd gone, but Anna clutched my arm and refused to let me move. When the police finally got there, I let them in and explained everything I'd seen. They searched the house, and with my help, confirmed that there was no sign of forced entry and every door and window was locked. That made me feel a little better, but it didn't explain why that guy was outside or where he had gone. After checking the yard and shining their flashlights around, they told us they didn't find anything unusual. One of them told me to call again if I saw him. Then they left. The rest of the week passed without incident. When I told my parents, they didn't seem overly concerned, which honestly surprised me. We don't live in a sketchy neighborhood, so I expected them to be more alarmed. But their calmness made me think maybe I had overreacted. What had really happened after all? Some random homeless guy creeping around? The more I thought about it, the more it felt like I was blowing things out of proportion. But if that were true, I probably wouldn't be writing this. Because for the past few nights, I've been waking up in the middle of the night to strange noises outside my window. Not trash cans this time, different sounds. I told my dad, and he's planning to install security cameras around the house, but still, I can't shake the feeling that the guy from that night isn't gone, that it wasn't a one-time thing. If anything else happens, I'll send a follow-up. The footsteps in the hallway. What you're about to hear is an experience that nearly made me lose my mind. It's still something that I think about quite often, if I'm being honest, but I've been able to recover a bit in the months since it happened. The whole story is pretty quick, so I'll get right into it. I'm a single guy in my mid-30s, living alone with no pets in a small one-story house. The house is really modest. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room, kitchen, dining room, and a tiny garage. That's it. Life is fantastic. Because of my profession, I can work on my own time and don't have to answer to anyone, whether that be a girlfriend, parents, or an employer. Freedom has always been an imperative part of my life, so I've done my best to maximize it wherever possible. I know a lot of people are different, and some might actually judge me for my, quote, immature lifestyle. But everyone has different priorities and preferences. As long as no one judges me, I won't judge them. The excess freedom definitely comes with its own set of drawbacks, though. I've developed some bad habits that I'm sure people would frown upon. One of them is my sleep schedule, which is god-awful. For some reason, I'm most productive at late hours of the night, so I often find myself staying up until dawn and sleeping into the afternoon. It's just how my body functions, and until I'm absolutely forced to, I don't see a reason to change anything. I was up really late one night, past 3 a.m., sitting at my desk, getting some work done on my computer. I was in the zone, not even listening to music. Imagine yourself at peak focus. That's the kind of groove I was in. The room was dead silent, and I was alone with my thoughts, the sound of my keyboard, and my work. And then, bam! Out of nowhere, the silence was shattered by the sound of footsteps pounding down the hallway toward my bedroom, followed by 3 or 4 deafening bangs on the door, the kind you'd expect from police trying to break into a drug den. I shot up from my chair so fast, I banged my knee on the desk and knocked my monitor over. I was shocked. It caught me completely off guard. Just imagine being in your own house at 3 a.m., alone, when that kind of noise hits. It was, and still is, the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. Standing up was pure instinct. After that, I was completely frozen. My eyes were locked on the door, dreading the moment it would burst open and someone would barge in. I imagined having to fight a complete stranger in pitch-black darkness, but it never came. I didn't hear anything else, not even footsteps retreating. It was like I had imagined it, but I was 100% sure I hadn't. I don't know how long I stood there, but I physically couldn't force myself to move. It was like sleep paralysis, except I wasn't dreaming. Then, finally, I heard footsteps quickly walking back down the hall. Someone had been there. I don't know why, but hearing those steps again unlocked my body. Without thinking, I grabbed an empty beer bottle off my desk, ran to the door, and started chasing whoever had broken into my home. I didn't even try to be quiet. I screamed at the top of my lungs like a lunatic, hoping it would give me the extra adrenaline I needed. I ran through the entire house screaming, but I never found anyone. My house isn't that big. There aren't many places someone could hide, but even after checking every room, there was no one there. All the doors and windows were locked too, which made things even more confusing. My burst of confidence drained away, and fear came rushing back. I sprinted to my room, locked the door, and called the police, while waiting for them to arrive. I sat in total silence, listening for any sound, but heard nothing. When the officers finally showed up, we searched the entire house together and still found nothing. One of them tried to convince me that whoever had been there must have left, but I insisted everything had been locked. He said I'd probably overlooked something, and it took everything in me not to curse him out. I know for a fact nothing was unlocked, but that didn't explain how that person had gotten into and out of my house unless I had imagined it, but I know I didn't. For the next week, I was a psychological mess. My brain refused to accept that I'd imagined something so vivid, yet I couldn't come up with a single logical way that person could have entered and vanished without a trace. I'm much better now, but for a while, I couldn't sleep, eat, or work properly. Even now, the only explanation I can think of is that I somehow missed an unlocked window or door. Still, why anyone would break into my house just to run away remains a complete mystery to me.